The Great Influenza by John M. Barry. Picture this. A young scientist walks into a naval hospital in Philadelphia, September 1918. His name is Paul Lewis, and his mentors, including Nobel Prize winners, swear he's the most brilliant mind they've ever encountered. But nothing in his training has prepared him for what he's about to witness. The ward is a scene from a nightmare. Row after row of young sailors, who were the picture of health just days earlier, are now writhing in agony. Blood is everywhere, but here's the terrifying part. It's not from battle wounds. It's pouring from their noses, erupting from violent coughs, seeping from their ears. Some men are coughing so hard they're literally tearing their own abdominal muscles apart. And their skin is turning an eerie shade of blue, so dark that doctors can barely distinguish white sailors from black ones. Lewis, a man who's spent his career hunting death in laboratories, has never seen anything like this. The disease isn't creeping through the hospital, it's exploding. 19 sick sailors one day, 87 the next. Then, 600. The beds have run out, and the Navy's quarantine efforts are proving utterly useless. Lewis thinks he knows what it is. Influenza. But this is influenza like nothing the world has ever seen before. What follows is the story of the deadliest plague in human history. This pandemic killed more people in a single year than the Black Death killed in a century. It claimed more lives in 24 weeks than AIDS has claimed in 24 years. But as John M. Barry reveals in his masterful book, The Great Influenza, this isn't just a story about death. It's about the first epic collision between modern science and nature's raw power. It's about remarkable men and women who stood against the storm armed with the only weapon they trusted, the human mind. By the time we're done, you'll understand not just what happened in 1918, but how it reshaped the foundation of medicine and public health. You'll see how the struggle against this virus forced a revolution in how we think, lead, and face the unknown. And you'll discover the timeless truth at the heart of this story. In times of crisis, our most essential weapon isn't just knowledge, it's truth itself. To really grasp the story of the 1918 influenza, you need to understand that it didn't just happen to the world. It happened to a very specific world, one where medicine itself was in the middle of a revolution. For over 2,000 years, from Hippocrates onward, medicine had barely changed. Doctors believed the body was governed by 4 fluids, or humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Sickness? Simply an imbalance. Got a fever and flushed skin? Too much blood. The solution was straightforward: bleeding. For centuries, the lancet, a small, sharp tool for cutting veins, was a doctor's most trusted instrument. This wasn't superstition. It was based on pure logic and observation. But here's the problem. It was logic that never questioned its own assumptions. Doctors observed nature, but never truly tested it. They didn't experiment. Then, in the 19th century, something radical began in Europe. Scientists in Paris and Germany started doing something revolutionary. They began to count. A French physician named Pierre Louis kept detailed records, comparing patients who were bled with those who weren't. His conclusion, based on simple arithmetic, was stunning. Bleeding didn't help. It was useless. Slowly, the old medical world began crumbling. New tools like the stethoscope, microscope, and thermometer allowed doctors to see and measure the body objectively. They started seeing disease not as a systemic imbalance, but as a specific invader attacking specific parts of the body. Revolutionary stuff. But in the United States, this revolution arrived painfully slowly. American medicine was frankly backward. In the late 1800s, it was harder to get into a decent college than into most medical schools. Many required no high school diploma, let alone science training. You could become a doctor by attending a few lectures and graduate without ever touching a patient. Oliver Wendell Holmes, physician and father of the Supreme Court Justice, once quipped that if all the medicines then in use could be sunk to the bottom of the sea, it would be better for mankind and worse for the fishes. Into this world came a handful of men, determined to change everything. Their story begins with one man, William Henry Welch. Welch was born into a family of doctors, but as a young man, he found medicine repugnant. Only after failing to secure a teaching position in Greek at Yale did he reluctantly turn to the family profession. But he did it his way. Instead of just apprenticing and attending lectures, he went to Europe, to the great German laboratories where a new world was opening up. There he learned from the masters pioneering bacteriology. He learned a new way of thinking. Trust nothing but experiment. Sit down before a fact as a little child and follow wherever nature leads. When he returned to America, he brought that fire with him. In 1893, he became one of the founding professors at a radical new institution, the Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine. Hopkins was unlike any other American medical school. Modeled on the great German universities, it was dedicated not just to teaching old knowledge, but creating new knowledge through relentless research. Its standards were unheard of. It required a college degree for admission and fluency in French and German, so students could read the latest scientific literature. Students didn't just listen to lectures. They worked in laboratories and examined patients in hospital wards from day one. Welch was perfect for this revolution. He wasn't a genius in the lab himself. He made no single magnificent discovery, but he had an almost supernatural ability to spot genius in others. He was an impresario, a builder, someone who could, as one colleague said, transform men's lives almost by the flick of a wrist. He assembled a faculty of brilliant young scientists, surgeon William Halsted, who revolutionized surgery, and clinician William Osler, whose textbook became medicine's Bible. Together, this small band of warriors, as Barry calls them, created an army. They trained a new generation of scientists who fanned out across the country, transforming other medical schools, Harvard, Penn, Michigan, all in the Hopkins image. Meanwhile, John D. Rockefeller, inspired by Osler's book, founded the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research in New York, with Welch as its guiding force and his protege, Simon Flexner, as its director. For the first time, American medicine wasn't just catching up to Europe, it was preparing to surpass it. This new scientific army was focused, disciplined, and ready for war. They were preparing for a major epidemic, which they knew was inevitable during the Great War. They stockpiled vaccines and antitoxins. They designed mobile laboratory railcars that could rush to any outbreak. They thought they were ready. They had absolutely no idea what was coming. The enemy didn't emerge from Europe's battlefields. The evidence Barry lays out is compelling. It most likely emerged from the flat, treeless plains of Haskell County, Kansas, in January 1918. Dr. Loring Minor, a country doctor who loved Greek classics but ate peas with his knife, noticed something strange. A new and violent illness was sweeping through his patients. It looked like influenza, but terrifyingly intense. It struck down the strongest, healthiest people in the county, killing them with stunning speed. Worried, Minor did something no one else in the country was doing. He formally warned the U.S. Public Health Service about an influenza of severe type. His was the only such report in the nation. In a sparsely populated place like Haskell, the virus might have burned itself out, but this was wartime. Young men from Haskell County were constantly traveling to and from Camp Funston, a massive Army training base 300 miles away. On March 4th, Just days after several men arrived from Haskell, the first soldier at Funston reported sick with influenza. Within 3 weeks, over 1,100 soldiers were in the hospital. Camp Funston was like a pump, sending a constant stream of men to other bases across America and to the battlefields of France. The virus traveled with them. A mild first wave of influenza swept across the United States and Europe in spring 1918. It made many sick, but killed few. In fact, it was so mild that some doctors writing in the prestigious medical journal The Lancet argued it couldn't be influenza because it was so harmless. But the virus wasn't harmless. It was adapting. To understand what happened next, you need to understand the nature of the influenza virus. It's what scientists call a mutant swarm. Unlike more stable organisms, an RNA virus like influenza makes countless mistakes when it replicates. Most mutations are useless, but some can change its very nature. When a virus passes from one host to another, it can become more efficient at infecting, and often more deadly. The virus that emerged in spring was like an apprentice killer. As it passed through millions of soldiers and civilians across the world that summer, it was honing its skills. It was learning how to kill with brutal efficiency. It was evolving. And then, in late August, in 3 separate port cities across the globe, Brest, France, Freetown, Sierra Leone, and Boston, Massachusetts, the master killer revealed itself. The second wave had begun. This time, it was different. In Boston, sailors at Commonwealth Pier began dying. The disease exploded into Camp Devens, a nearby army base. A doctor there wrote to a friend, "These men start with what appears to be an ordinary attack of influenza, and when brought to the hospital, they very rapidly develop the most vicious type of pneumonia that has ever been seen. A few hours later, you can begin to see the blueness extending from their ears and spreading all over the face, until it's hard to distinguish the colored men from the white. It's only a matter of a few hours then, until death comes. It is horrible." The morgues overflowed. Bodies were stacked like cordwood. William Welch, the great leader of American medicine, was rushed to the camp. He walked into the autopsy room and saw lungs so full of blood and fluid they were heavy and sodden. The sight so disturbed him that he, a man who had seen everything, turned to his colleagues and said, "This must be some new kind of infection or plague." It wasn't plague. It was just influenza. But it was an influenza triggering a devastating overreaction from the immune system. The young and healthy, who had the strongest immune systems, were ironically the most vulnerable. Their bodies launched a massive counterattack against the virus, a cytokine storm that flooded the lungs with fluid and debris, destroying the very tissue they were supposed to protect. Victims were, in effect, drowning in their own bodily fluids. Their lungs were being ripped apart. As the virus exploded, society began to break down. This happened in a country singularly unprepared to face it, because its entire focus was on something else: winning the war. President Woodrow Wilson had forged the United States into a weapon. He created a vast government propaganda machine, the Committee on Public Information, led by a man named George Creel, whose goal was to create one white-hot mass of war enthusiasm. To preserve morale, truth became the first casualty. Newspapers, under intense pressure from the government and their own self-censorship, printed nothing that might hurt the war effort. So as the epidemic began sweeping the nation, officials and the press systematically downplayed the danger. In Philadelphia, 300 sailors from Boston arrived at the Navy Yard on September 7th. Within days, hundreds were sick. Yet the city's public health director, Wilmer Cruson, assured the public there was no danger. Doctors pleaded with him to cancel a massive Liberty Loan parade scheduled for September 28th, warning it would spread the disease like wildfire. Cruzan refused. The parade was essential for war morale. 200,000 people packed the streets of Philadelphia for the parade. 72 hours later, every single bed in every one of the city's 31 hospitals was full. In the first day after the incubation period, 117 people died. The next day, more. The day after that, even more. Soon, hundreds were dying every day. But newspapers and officials kept lying. The peak of the influenza epidemic has been reached, they declared one day, only to see the death toll double the next. The lies bred terror. People couldn't trust what they were told, so they trusted nothing. Fear became its own epidemic. In a city where 500,000 people were sick, society began to implode. People were afraid to leave their homes. They were afraid to help their neighbors. A Red Cross worker pleaded, "Hundreds of women have been told that there are families in which every member is ill, in which the children are actually starving because there's no one to give them food. The death rate is so high, and they still hold back." There were no doctors. There were no nurses. Most horrifyingly, there were no coffins, and no one to dig graves. Bodies piled up in homes for days, on porches, in hallways. Priests began driving horse-drawn wagons down the streets, calling for people to bring out their dead, just as they had during the bubonic plague. The city was forced to use steam shovels to dig mass graves. Philadelphia was not alone. The story repeated itself across the nation and across the world. A doctor in Wellington, New Zealand, described his city as a city of the dead. A train leaving an infected army camp in Illinois became a rolling coffin, with nearly a quarter of the troops taken directly to a hospital upon arrival. From the ice of the Arctic to the jungles of Africa, the virus hunted mankind. In some remote Alaskan villages, so many died so quickly that there was no one left to feed the sled dogs, which, maddened by hunger, broke into homes and devoured the dead. In all of human history, there had never been a death toll like it. An estimated 675,000 Americans died. Worldwide, the number was likely between 50 and 100 million people. While society was collapsing, that small cadre of scientists was racing against time. They had to find the cause of the disease. Was it the bacterium Richard Pfeiffer had discovered in the 1890s and named Bacillus influenzae? Or was it something else, something they couldn't see, a filterable virus? Laboratories across the country became war zones. Scientists like Paul Lewis in Philadelphia, William Park and Anna Williams in New York, and Oswald Avery at the Rockefeller Institute worked around the clock, surrounded by death, trying to isolate the killer. At first, many believed it was Pfeiffer's bacillus. Vaccines were rushed into production based on this assumption. Lewis, Park, and others poured all their energy into creating something, anything, that could stop the killing. But Oswald Avery, the quiet, obsessive hunter in the laboratory, wasn't so sure. He was a man who thrived on disappointment, who believed in digging one deep hole rather than collecting surface nuggets. In the midst of the chaos, he refused to be rushed. His experiments were telling him something different. He found Pfeiffer's bacillus, yes, but not always. And sometimes he found lungs devastated by the disease with no bacteria in them at all. The pandemic eventually burned itself out. The virus mutated again, this time toward its mean, becoming less lethal. And those who survived had immunity. But the scientific quest did not end. It took more than a decade of painstaking work to finally prove the answer. In 1931, Richard Shope, a brilliant young scientist who had worked under Paul Lewis, proved that a similar disease in swine was caused by a virus. Then, in 1933, British scientists, following Shope's methods, finally isolated the human influenza virus. Pfeiffer had been wrong. The scientists who had raced to make vaccines against his bacillus had been chasing a ghost. But the story doesn't end there. The legacy of the pandemic was profound. It spurred the creation of modern public health systems around the world. It led to the founding of the National Institutes of Health, and it set Oswald Avery on a path that would lead to one of the most important discoveries of the 20th century. Driven by questions raised during the pandemic, Avery returned to his obsession, the pneumococcus bacterium, a major cause of the pneumonia that killed so many influenza victims. He became fascinated by how a harmless, non-lethal strain of the bacteria could somehow be transformed into a deadly one. For years, he worked in near-total obscurity, publishing nothing between 1934 and 1944. Then in 1944, he and his colleagues published a paper that changed the world. He had found the transforming principle. He had proven that the substance that carried genetic information, the very blueprint of life, was not protein, as nearly all scientists believed. It was a simple molecule called DNA. He started by hunting the cause of a plague and ended by discovering the secret of life itself. He never won a Nobel Prize, but his discovery paved the way for Watson and Crick and the entire field of molecular biology. It was a strange and powerful testament to the idea that even in the face of unimaginable devastation, the relentless pursuit of knowledge can lead us to places we never thought possible. When you close a book like The Great Influenza, you're left with a kind of quiet awe. It's not just the scale of the tragedy, which is almost impossible to comprehend, but the profound lessons it holds about science, leadership, and human nature. The first, and perhaps most powerful lesson, is about the nature of truth. In 1918, the leaders of the United States made a deliberate choice. They decided that morale was more important than truth. They believed that by reassuring the public, by telling them this was only influenza or the same old grip, they could prevent panic and keep the war machine running. But their lies had the opposite effect. Because what people saw with their own eyes, the wagons piled with bodies, the crepe on their neighbors' doors, was so terrifyingly different from what they were being told that they lost all trust in authority. And when trust evaporates, society begins to fracture. Fear fills the vacuum. People stop helping one another. They isolate themselves. That's what happened in 1918. The lies didn't prevent panic, they amplified it. They created a terror that was, in its own way, as destructive as the virus itself. The simple, brutal lesson is this: you don't manage a crisis by managing information. You manage it by telling the truth. Because, in the face of a terrifying reality, the only thing that gives people a fighting chance is a clear-eyed understanding of what they're up against. The second lesson is about the scientific process itself. We often think of science as a series of neat aha moments, but this book shows it for what it really is: a slow, messy, frustrating, and deeply human struggle. In the midst of the pandemic, even the best scientists in the world were forced to make educated guesses. Men like Paul Lewis and William Park, acting under immense pressure, chased the wrong culprit, Pfeiffer's bacillus, because it was the most logical suspect. Their efforts, though heroic, were ultimately futile. But then you have someone like Oswald Avery. He embodies the true spirit of scientific inquiry. He wasn't the fastest or the flashiest. He was the most patient. He had the courage to embrace uncertainty, to admit he didn't know, and to keep digging, even when everyone else thought the case was closed. He reminds us that true breakthroughs rarely come from a single stroke of genius. They come from persistence. They come from the discipline to follow the evidence, no matter how strange or inconvenient, and from the quiet confidence to trust the process, even when it feels like you're getting nowhere. So what can we take away from this story today? The first step is simple, and it's something the doctors in 1918 would have agreed with. When you feel sick, stay home. Rest. It was the best advice then, and it's still the best advice now. It protects you and it protects others. But the deeper action is a mental one. This book is a powerful reminder to cultivate a healthy skepticism for official narratives, especially in a crisis. It teaches us to question reassurances that feel disconnected from reality. It encourages us to seek out the data, to listen to the experts who are willing to say we don't know, and to value the unvarnished truth above comforting lies. It shows us that true resilience, whether in a society or in our own lives, doesn't come from pretending things are fine. It comes from facing the facts, however grim, and then moving forward with clarity and determination. That was a summary of The Great Influenza by John M. Barry. We've certainly covered a lot of ground today, but I have to be honest with you. A summary, even a detailed one, is like looking at a map of the Grand Canyon. It can show you the shape and the scale, but it can't make you feel the wind on your face or the sheer, breathtaking immensity of standing on the edge. The real power of this book is in the stories, in the details, in the way Barry makes you feel the chill of that hospital ward in 1918. This summary is meant to be a guide, to help you decide if this journey is one you want to take. If anything we've discussed today has sparked your curiosity or given you a moment of pause, then I truly encourage you to pick up a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning history, it's about understanding the very fabric of our modern world and the timeless struggle between humanity and nature. You can find a link to the book in the description below. And if you found this summary valuable, I'd be grateful if you'd take a moment to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It lets me know that these deep dives are helpful, and it ensures you won't miss our next exploration of another world-changing book from the billionaire's bookshelf. Let's keep learning and growing together.